Well, I want to thank the Armstrongs for singing that song. Jesus, Lord to me. Lord to you. Lord to me. Let's talk to Him right now. Lord Jesus, Lord to us, we're asking once more for what Bob prayed for earlier, the Holy Spirit in a special measure to anoint our hearts, our minds, our ears, my lips. We're going to take a look here at some of the first few verses of John 14, and we just pray that You'd help us to see why we need not have troubled hearts, even though we live in a world of sin and heartache. So send Your Spirit to help us in that way, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Next Sabbath's assignment, for those who are trying to follow along in advance, will be, again, John 14. We're going to stay in John 14 for a little while here. And the next section will be verses 4 through 11. 4 through 11. So you can have read those in advance. And if you get any special revelation that you want to share with me, I'd be happy to hear what the Spirit tells you too. This morning, as we look at the first 3 or 4 verses of this chapter, I am reminded of something that Job said. If Job was here today, perhaps he would tell us once again what he said in chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. He said, "Hardship does not spring from the soil, nor does trouble sprout from the ground. Yet man is born to trouble, as surely as sparks fly upward." Now, if you've ever sat beside a campfire and watched the sparks, they fly upwards, as does the smoke. He probably could have just as easily said, man is as surely born to trouble as smoke floats upwards. Trouble. We have been born on the wrong planet, at least presently, under the conditions we find it. And Solomon tells us on this planet there is no exception. Every one of us can expect trouble, experience trouble. Solomon says there is no discharge in this war, and we've all been conscripted into it. You know, a boat might launch out onto a smooth, glassy sea. More than once, I've gone out sailing on what looked to me to be a wonderful day, only to discover that the winds are variable, and that before the day was over, I was in terror by the size of the waves that had come up while I was so far away that I had to negotiate them in order to get back again. And even a large battleship is at risk in a hurricane. So, the glassy water might look good at the beginning, but waves and storms come and go. It's great to walk with Jesus along the shore of the Sea of Galilee when the sun is shining and the birds are singing and the crowd is happy and contented and children are laughing. It's great to follow Jesus at times like that. But in this passage, John 14, as we begin, we must remember how John 13 set it up. And Jesus is walking with His disciples down the slope from Jerusalem. He's crossing the brook Kidron, and He is going to Gethsemane. We're on a path with Jesus that leads to Gethsemane. Gethsemane is a far cry from Galilee. There are those who would like to teach that and preach that prosperity is what you can expect. Nothing but blessing upon blessing. Gift upon gift. Prosperity preachers abound. One in particular, Joel Osteen, likes to tell people that you can claim it. Just find it, hang on to it, and you can get it. God's just going to make you prosper. No wonder 7 million people watch him every Sunday on television. No wonder he sold 2.5 million copies of his book in the first 6 months. Best Life Now. Because everybody wants to be rich and happy. But if you remember 1 Thessalonians 5:3, while people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. You recognize those pictures? Were those familiar from 9/11? Suddenly, like labor pains upon a pregnant woman. Jesus did not say, take up your lounge chair and recline with me. He said, take up your cross. Take up your cross. And the prosperity preachers don't like the cross, and they don't talk about that. But that's what Jesus said. Take up your cross and follow me. As we look around today, we see plenty of reasons for having troubled hearts. There's a lot of trouble going on our planet. Never in recorded history have there been as many natural disasters happening on planet Earth. I was in a doctor's office one day, and there was a Newsweek magazine. I picked it up. The cover of the magazine said, "Are natural disasters increasing in our world?" That was the question. It was the cover feature story. And I went inside, and they started talking about the number of earthquakes and tsunamis and floods and just on, fires. And they asked the question in the article, are there really more of these happening than there used to be? Or is it just because we have more technology to cover it and the news shows it and we're more aware of it? Is that why there's so much in our, coming to our attention? And then they went on to show from history that as long as history has been recording disasters, we were light years ahead of the standard and the norm in terms of how much was happening now. It was just amazing. He said, no, this isn't just a matter of the media reporting. There are so many more disasters happening now than there ever were that it's just no comparison. That was what the article said. Just Newsweek. The news certainly reminds us of causes for terror. However, each of us has our own private floods of sorrow. We don't need to see the sorrow around us on the television news broadcast because we have private floods of sorrow. We have private earthquakes of illness. We have private droughts of loneliness, tsunamis of grief, fires of loss, hurricanes of confusion, showers of pain, winds of adversity, snares of the fowler, incentives for fear, pestilence that walks in darkness, and destruction that wastes at noonday. Nobody gets off unscathed. We're in a battle zone. Shrapnel is flying, and it hits everybody in one form or another. Some struggle with finances, not knowing where they're going to get enough for the next meal. Some struggle with employers, overbearing and difficult to please. Some struggle with co-workers that make the job an unpleasant situation. Some struggle with workloads that are so horrendous they don't know how they can keep going. Some struggle to maintain businesses that seem to have a hard time keeping out of the red ink. Some struggle with crumbling relationships. Far more than we know, struggle from abuses that are happening secretly and behind closed doors. Some struggle from physical or emotional pains. Some are dealing with personal failures, private sorrows that people don't know about, that no human ear has heard, but God perhaps has been talked to about, private sorrows that we can't even imagine. And I haven't even mentioned yet the troubles of soul that Christians experience as they stumble on the path of sin and then live with regret and remorse, discouragement and shame, disappointment, those kinds of struggles. No doubt we could commiserate together for a long time about all the trouble in the world. We could talk about trouble till the cows come home, as they say. And I'm thinking you're probably hoping that's not what we're going to do. But on that path to Gethsemane, Jesus, knowing full well what's coming down the pike, just hours away, on that path to Gethsemane, Jesus said in John 14, verse 1, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me." Isn't it interesting that he would say that on the path to Gethsemane? If ever anybody had cause for troubled heart, it would be Jesus at this moment and in the moments and hours ahead. But he says, "Let not your hearts be troubled." In the midst of difficulty, it is easy. It's natural for our hearts to become troubled. I suppose you could almost say that it's as natural for our hearts to become troubled as sparks flying upwards. But ask yourself this question. Has a troubled heart ever fixed any of the troubles? Has lamentation in the midst of drought ever brought on showers of rain? What does worry do? What does worry bring other than ulcers and headaches and sleepless nights? One author says that worry is blind and it cannot discern the future. But we trouble ourselves about what lies a complete sun's journey away, another day off. We don't even know, but we trouble ourselves over it. And we worry, and we wonder, and we bite our nails, and our stomach muscles tighten. A doubting, fretful heart takes from us the joy that we do have. Can't stop for joy. I'm too upset about what's coming. I can remember once I was working on a motor. I was trying to put a motor back into a car. It was the first time I'd ever done such a thing. And I did not know that there was a special tool that they sell that helps you to line up the transmission and the motor together so that they slide all the way together like they should. I didn't know about that tool, and so I was trying to slide my motor onto the transmission, and it was very heavy. It was hanging on a chain, but I was inside of an engine compartment, and I'm hunkered around, and I'm trying to get this thing slid onto the transmission, and it's not going, and I'm pulling the motor back again a little bit, and then trying again, and sliding again, and tilting it a little bit, and trying to slide it. I'm getting more and more tired, and because I'm in this narrow little compartment, sometimes the momentum and the inertia or the weight of the motor I would slam my hand between the motor and the sidewall there of the car, the fender or something, and I'd, pull my hand out and look at the skin knuckle, and I'd try again. And I remember doing this on a Sunday. I was in a shop, and there was a door open to the outside. It was a Sunday morning that I had started on it, and I worked on just this one thing, trying to get the motor back on to the transmission for 6 hours. 6 hours. Just 6 hours. I tell you, I remember feeling like life was just not worth living. I got so discouraged and depressed with this thing. So many bruises and skinned knuckles. Then it occurred to me, maybe I should pray. Took me 6 hours. Stubborn, self-dependent effort. 6 hours. So I prayed, and guess what? God doesn't need the special tool to hook them together. I said amen, and I tried one more time. I'll never forget hearing the sound of the motor slide into place. And clunk as it pulled up against the transmission. And do you know what? At the precise moment that it went clunk into the transmission, birds began singing outside. Birds began singing. I remember it distinctly. All kinds of birds began singing. I thought, isn't that amazing? It's like God had all these birds just waiting all morning to sing until I got the engine together, and then they start singing. It's like all creation groans with me, Well, you're laughing because you realize that the birds did not start singing at that moment. I started hearing them at that moment. Why had I not heard them before? Because I was so consumed with my trouble that I wasn't aware of the joy that was going on just outside the door. That's what troubled hearts can do for us. They can rob us of the joy that we do have. Troubled hearts. They manufacture giants. They say, oh, there are giants in the land. We cannot take it. We appear to ourselves as grasshoppers by comparison to them. Giants. We invent giants. Forgetting that David went up against a giant without even a weapon. Giants, no problem for a trusting heart, right? But that's what troubled hearts do. They manufacture giants. It would be good for us to remember when our hearts are troubling us that it could be worse. It could be worse. I've heard somebody say that it doesn't matter how bad your trouble is. Somewhere somebody has it worse than you do. And one day, when we're in heaven on the other side, we're going to be more than compensated for having been born on the wrong planet. No matter what we've suffered while here. No matter how far you fall into the abyss of trouble, underneath, the Bible tells us, are the everlasting arms. Underneath. You'll never crash, because at the bottom, even if it's at the bottom, there are everlasting arms waiting for those who are seeking God. Have you looked around? When you've been depressed or discouraged about trouble in your life, have you looked around and noticed somebody else's troubles that were greater than yours? I did not see it, but I was told a story that kind of reminds me that you and I are not the emperor or the king and queen of grief. There are others. Far worse situations than ours. The story I was told was that David Gates, I don't even know what country he was in, was traveling. He tells this story on a DVD, I guess. And he was traveling along in a crowded street, and suddenly he became aware there was a group of people kind of congregating around a part of the sidewalk, and he wanted to see what was causing all of the interest, so he got a little closer to the edge of the crowd, and then he noticed what appeared to him to simply be a human head lying on a pillow. And he heard somebody say, it's just a head. He got a little closer and realized the head was moving. And people were staring. And it was the head of a woman. But for whatever reason, she had been born without arms and legs and with just sort of a bubble of a body to support the head and neck. And somebody had taken her and set her on a pillow on the sidewalk in this busy part of town where people passed by. And David Gates was looking at her. She had a paintbrush in her teeth and a canvas in front of her. And she was painting pictures with her head. He was so moved. He got down on the ground, lay down beside her so that they could have eye contact. And he introduced himself. And you know what she said? After telling him her name, she said, "Isn't God wonderful?" That's what she said. Isn't God wonderful? Of course, David Gates is thinking to himself, why would she say that? He goes, why do you say that? I'm interested. She said, He gives me the ability to paint pictures which I sell and cover my needs so that I'm not a burden to anybody financially. I can provide for my own needs because of God's goodness to me. Isn't He wonderful? I praise Him. She's filled with joy. I praise Him for this. David Gates said, would you paint a picture for me? And she said, sure. She said, come back in an hour. I'll have painted one for you. He came back in an hour, and there was a painting. It's a painting of a woman. The face looked somewhat like the woman who was doing the painting. But it wasn't her, because the picture was of a woman with full body, arms and legs, hands, feet, fingers, toes. David Gates said, who is the woman that you painted? She said, me, as I will be one day. There's always somebody who's in a situation that is worse than yours. Really? I remember my son and I watching a documentary on the genocide in Rwanda. And the things we saw, were so horrific that when the film was over, we sort of sat there, numb. And then my son said to me, Dad, after what we just saw, I don't know how you could ever have a bad day. Don't know how you could ever have a bad day. Well, that's what happens when we look horizontally. But Scripture tells us to look vertically, and that will bring us courage too. Hebrews 12, verses 3 to 4, tell us to consider Jesus. Consider Him who endured such opposition from sinful men. Consider Him so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Consider Him. Boy, the next time you're discouraged about circumstances, life just seems like it's bigger than you can handle and you don't know what you're going to do next, think about Gethsemane. Think about all that Jesus suffered on this planet for you and for me. It's hard to be full of self-pity when you think about what He did for us. You know, there's another thing about troubled hearts. Troubled hearts bring dishonor to God. You might ask how. Well, the troubled heart is actually the result of somebody endeavoring to usurp God and remove Him from the throne. Really? That's what it is. Well, you might wonder, how could that be? Just because I'm worried about something, that doesn't usurp God from His throne. Yes, it does. Why are you worried? The reason you're worried is because you don't see how you're going to solve this problem, so you worry about it. Which tells you that your focus is on yourself. You think you have to fix it. You think you're the one that's going to have to solve the problem. So you don't know how to solve it, therefore you worry. Which means that you have taken God off the throne and you're sitting on it yourself. You have become your own God, except you're just not sure how to solve it. Worry is probably one of the most clear indicators, thermometer indicators, that you have slipped into self-dependence instead of trusting Jesus, and that you need to refocus your attention on Him. Satan wants to demoralize. He wants to dishearten. He wants to cause you to let go of Jesus and take the reins and try to fix it yourself. That's what he wants, because he knows if you separate from Jesus, you're in worse trouble than the trouble you thought you were in. So what's the solution? Well, it's to look away from self. It's to look away from self and look towards Jesus. Looking at Jesus is the remedy for troubled hearts. You remember when Buddy Hoteling was here, he sang a song last spring. that came to my mind as I was working on this. By the way, I just take a moment to apologize. I have no idea why this microphone continues to pop and all. But maybe we'll be taking up an offering soon for a PA system. Buddy sang a song. And some of the lyrics for that song go like this. When Peter got back in the boat that night, he had almost drowned. He was doing okay, then he spotted the waves and he went straight down. He said, Lord, it started well. Can you tell me why I fell? Jesus looked into his eyes and softly said, when you need to travel a troubled sea, keep your eyes on me. When the water is rough, I'll be lifting you up. Keep your eyes on me. There is shelter in a storm when it's me you're looking toward. When you travel a troubled sea, keep your eye on me. That's what Jesus was really saying in verse 1 of John 14. He said, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Well, of course, believe is synonymous with trust. So what's he saying? Here's the solution to troubled hearts. Trust me. Cast your cares on me. Don't worry for yourself. You're not the one that has to fix it. I promise to take care. My Father and I are interested in partnering with you, and we'll take the load. We'll lift the load. So don't let your heart be troubled. Trust me. Believe in me. You believe in my Father. Believe in me. That's the cure for troubled hearts. He's saying, rest assured, the Lord of hosts is with you. The God of Jacob is your refuge. He will not forsake you. Three of the gospel writers contain this promise from Jesus found in Mark 13. Jesus is saying this, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. And then what did he say? What are some of his words? See, on the tail of that promise, my words will never pass away. Heaven and earth will disappear before my words will fade. And what are some of his words? Well, Hebrews 13:5, Paul tells us he himself has said, I will never leave you, never fail you, nor forsake you. Wow. Now you think about that. No matter what you're going through, no matter how bad it seems, Jesus has given you his word, and he says, my word will not pass away. And what does his word include? This promise, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Regardless of the mountain that is threatening to crush you, regardless of the wave that threatens to engulf you, regardless of the physician's prognosis, there is one who said, I will never leave you. I will never leave you. Never till the last syllable of recorded time. Never until every star shall disappear and the sun refuse to shine. Never until the last sunset of the last day. Never until light vanishes and night falls. Never until time collapses, exhausted at the gate of eternity. Never. I will never leave you. Can you hear his voice, strong and steady? Can you hear his voice, sweet like the sound of many waters? Can you hear his voice rumbling like majestic thunder? And what's he saying? I will never leave you. I will never leave you. Who is this that's saying this to us? Who is it? I, the first and last, will never leave you. I, the hope of glory, will never leave you. I, the death destroyer and the grave spoiler, will never leave you. I, Alpha and Omega, will never leave you. I, the Prince of Glory, will never leave you. I, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, will never leave you. What's he saying? I'm writing you a check, and it will not bounce, and it will never be overdrawn at any bank. I will never leave you. So, let the devil take his best shot, because our side still wins. Still wins. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how troubled the world is around you. It doesn't matter how troubled the world is in your own heart. Let the devil take his best shot. Our side still wins. Spurgeon said it this way: if all the devils in hell should appear visibly before us and show their teeth with flame pouring from their mouths as from 10,000 ovens, yet so long as the Lord of hosts lives, we will not fear, but we will lift up our banners and we will laugh our enemy to scorn. I will never leave you, he said. So it all boils down to your focus. It boils down to what has your attention. That's the solution. That's the remedy to troubled hearts. Where's your focus? In West Virginia, there is a doctor who has founded back in 1971 a hospital that offers free care to everyone who comes. His name is Hunter Adams. He has a nickname. Maybe you've heard of his nickname, Patch Adams. Hunter Adams went into a mental hospital to observe patients there. And while he was there, he came across a man. This man kept coming up to people, holding up 4 fingers. And he'd come up to them and he'd put his 4 fingers in front of their face. And he'd say, "How many fingers? How many fingers?" The person he's asking would say, 4. And he'd say, "No, no." And he'd walk away frustrated. And he'd go up to somebody else. "How many fingers? How many fingers?" They'd say, 4. "Oh, no." And he'd walk off. I'm just trying to freeze here. I'm sorry. I'm trying to find a spot, the sweet spot where the noise doesn't pop. How many fingers? Well, everybody kept getting it wrong, and the man kept getting angrier and angrier. He comes up to Hunter, and he says, "How many fingers?" And Hunter's afraid to answer because he's seen everybody else mess up. And he looks at the man. And then the man says, "See what no one else sees. Focus on the problem, and you cannot see the solution. You must look beyond the fingers." Well, I was intrigued by that. If you will hold your hand up and look beyond your fingers at something farther out, your peripheral vision will see twice as many fingers up there. And so he held his fingers up. He told Patch, "Focus beyond the problem and you will see the solution." "How many fingers?" Patch said, "I see 8. And he said, "Yes. Yes. You focused beyond the problem and you saw the solution." Nebuchadnezzar, he's just thrown 3 Hebrews into the furnace. And he says to his guards, "How many Hebrews?" "How many Hebrews?" "Didn't we throw 3 in there? How come I see 4? And one looks like the Son of God. How come I see 4? Because the 3 Hebrews had been focusing beyond their present problem. And Jesus, who said, "I will never leave you or forsake you," showed up in person in the flames. 2 Corinthians, Paul's telling us the very same message. Where's your focus? How many fingers? 2 Corinthians 4. We are hard pressed on every side, but we're not crushed. We're perplexed, but we're not in despair. We're persecuted, but we're not abandoned. We are struck down, but we're not destroyed. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So, we fix our eyes not on what is seen. How many fingers? We fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Let not your heart be troubled. John 14:2, he continues, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. How many fingers? Keep looking up. Change your focus, not on the momentary trouble that surrounds you, that you're embroiled in. Look beyond. Look beyond. Look to Jesus. Believe in Him. Trust in Him. A young girl had a dream. In her dream, the end of the world had already taken place and Jesus had come. She was in heaven with friends, and they were seated in a grassy area under a tree, overwhelmed by the splendor of heaven, and talking with each other excitedly about their surroundings. And as they were there talking, two people approached them. They were familiar. They were a couple of people who had been members of the same church that this girl belonged to. They had died long before the girl did. And as they approached she and her friends there in her dream, these two people who had died earlier said to her, they said, please tell us about the trials that you experienced while we were sleeping, while we were dead. And she wrote in a little book called Early Writings, she wrote, and this is what she said: we tried to call up our greatest trials, but they looked so small compared with the far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory that surrounded us that we could not speak of them. Couldn't even speak of them. The greatest troubles. We couldn't even speak of them. And instead we cried out, hallelujah, heaven is cheap enough at any cost. The worst trouble, that woman, bless her heart, that woman that painted that picture for David Gates. One day, when she's in heaven, one day, someone's going to say to her, so tell me about the trial. Must have been terrible to be there on that sidewalk day after day. No way to get around. Tell me more about that. And she'll say, are you kidding? It's nothing compared to this eternal weight of glory. I can't even speak about it. Heaven is cheap enough at any cost. Any cost. Let not your heart be troubled. In 5 days, it'll be the anniversary of the death of my son's best friend, Travis Allen. And it put me in mind, as I was preparing for this sermon, of a conversation Travis had with his doctors. I've told the story before of Travis. Many or most of you may remember, at the age of 18, he died of cancer. He was there in Children's Hospital in Seattle, Washington. They had been fighting his cancer for a long time now. The doctors asked to see him as a group, and there they were together, Travis and a whole group of doctors. And what they said to him was, Travis, we're sorry to tell you this, but we have lost the war. You're not going to win. We've tried all we know to try. The disease is going to take you out. So we're here today to talk to you about the various choices you have regarding the care you will receive while waiting for it to take you out. In other words, we're going to give you the scenarios, the protocols that you can follow. You can kind of choose how you want things to happen next. And so they described these protocols, various options that were available to Travis. And when they were done, one of the doctors leaned forward and he said, so Travis, he said, tell us what you see for your future. He meant, what protocol do you want us to use? This is what Travis said. He said, "Doctor, I'll tell you what I see for my future. Not too long from now, I'm going to fall asleep. And not too long after that, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to live forever. That's what I see for my future." The doctor said, "I'm glad that that concept brings you comfort." Travis said, "It's not a concept. It's reality, and it's in your Bible. Let not your heart be troubled." Travis could say with Paul in 2 Timothy, "I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to keep what I've committed unto him until that day." I'm looking past the 4 fingers, and I see someone who looks like the Son of God. Travis was saying, I'm in his hands. And when you are in his hands, nothing there can touch you except him. I'm in his hands.